Bitcoin is providing a lifeline to Ukrainian refugees fleeing war with access to their savings cut off by the traditional banking system. Bitcoin stored on cold wallet USB keys are their digital gold. Joining us now to discuss is Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategist Officer at the Human Rights Foundation. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us. So for over a decade, you've been working with Ukrainian activists. Walk us through some of their stories now in relation to the war and how Bitcoin is playing a role.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to have some background context. As of today, Putin's war in Ukraine has caused about 10 million people to flee their homes. That's 10 million Ukrainians who've either been displaced internally or who are now refugees in European countries like Poland, Germany, Romania. More precisely, it's about 4 million Ukrainians who fled into the wider Europe. And this has happened, obviously, as you know, in a matter of days and weeks. This war has been a blitzkrieg. It's been extremely fast. When something happens so suddenly, and I hope everyone remembers, the kind of eerie kind of silence in the days leading up to the war, Ukrainians were trying to get on with their lives. Most people hoped that nothing would happen. Even in the West, experts didn't necessarily agree that there would be an invasion. In that fog of war scenario, not everybody was like preparing for such a thing. And when you are a family and your wealth is tied up in a house, perhaps, maybe in a stock market, maybe in, sort of retirement assets, these things are not liquid. You can't just like take them with you, right? And of course, immediately when the war began, the country's banking system froze up. Things became extremely restricted. Cash became a hot commodity. And the hryvnia, like the local currency in Ukraine, was technically frozen by the government at a particular exchange rate. But in the black market, obviously, it has cratered. So, for example, versus the Polish zloty, pre-war, it was an exchange rate of like 7-1. Today, it's 20-1. So the Ukrainian currency has completely collapsed. And people have been fleeing, their homes to the west of Ukraine and then beyond into Europe or elsewhere. And when they get to that new place, they may not have access to their savings. So the interesting wrinkle to this story, and the maybe like one bit of kind of hope for the future for similar situations, is that there is a technology that allows people to take their wealth with them. I've documented this previously in people's stories who've left places like Afghanistan and Syria, Venezuela, other large refugee crises. This is a new one. And you know what? The Ukrainians are equipped. According to Chainalysis data, the country was top 5 in the world in terms of per capita Bitcoin and cryptocurrency usage. It's a very connected country. People are very mobile savvy. And, a lot of younger people, when they fled, they were able to take their wealth with them. There's a story today in CNBC about a guy that took 40% of his savings with him when he had to flee. And, when you bring your Bitcoin with you to Poland or Romania or whatever, you still control it. I mean, whether it's on a paper wallet or whether it's on a hardware wallet, or even if it's just on a phone wallet and you have a few $100 of Bitcoin on there, that's yours and it can't be confiscated or debased or devalued. And just from a short-term perspective, Bitcoin's value has remained pretty steady throughout the course of the war, hovering around $40,000. It hasn't done what the Ukrainian currency or Russian ruble have done in terms of like lose 30, 40, 50% of their value. So basically what we're seeing is people able to tap into a new technology. Once they get to Poland or Romania, they can then sell their Bitcoin quite easily for local currency to buy what they need. There are ATM networks and merchant networks, brick and mortar store networks all across Poland, for example, dozens and dozens of them, where you can go to a deli or an ATM location and you can just, without ID, without any sort of bank account, you can withdraw cash from your Bitcoin up to, I think, 1,000 euros per day worth. And that's really interesting and important to have that network. So I think that a lot of aid workers are thinking about this now. It's problematic to give away cash in a war zone. It's unsafe. It's risky. If you can do airdrops with Bitcoin, then, that's something that people are looking at. And I think it can help a lot of folks because once you get to Europe, that Bitcoin is liquid and can be traded and can be exchanged for fiat currency that can buy you whatever you need. So I think that's the sort of summary of what's happening.
Yeah. Wow, that was an an incredibly eloquent summary and putting the context into that. Thank you so much. Airdrops for Bitcoin, that's a fascinating concept. So I wonder, from the humanitarian aid, and we were showing images of the humanitarian crisis, refugees in Ukraine and trying to escape or trying to just survive this war. So what of their savings in their bank accounts, is that just completely inaccessible to them? And using Bitcoin, are they exclusively converting to EU currencies? Are they using Bitcoin for goods? Is it too early for that? Peer-to-peer exchanges?
Yeah, well, there's a historian at Columbia who studies monetary history. His name's Adam Tooze. And Adam wrote a great piece the other day, I think it came out yesterday, about this issue of the fact that, so some countries like Poland and Romania are allowing Ukrainians, if they've scrapped some cash together, they're allowing them to exchange that hryvnia for whether it's euros or zloty, etc., to a very small, like a few $100s worth. Obviously, these European nations don't want to take on the liability of this paper currency that's going to go to zero, or it's going to collapse almost entirely. So there's a huge debate happening right now at the ECB level about what to do with the hryvnia coming into Europe. Countries are trying to be generous, and they're trying to accept some of this essentially liability that may go to zero and give some more valuable fiat in return to try and help refugees. But there's going to be huge limitations on this process, and nobody wants to be left holding the hryvnia at this point. You could say the same thing about the ruble, which is also something that is going to become increasingly worthless over time. So you have...
How can people help? What are you recommending?
Well, look, at the moment, I think that it's important to understand that Bitcoin is liquid, that if you send Bitcoin to friends or family that you know that are in Ukraine or that are in Europe that have left, that they'll be able to sell that Bitcoin for fiat currency and buy food and goods and what they need. That's the first piece of information that's important. Once you grasp that, then maybe you want to incorporate it into your aid organizations' policies. I mean, at the Human Rights Foundation, we've been using Bitcoin to reach activists inside Belarus and other Eastern European countries for years. Our first fundraiser with Bitcoin was in 2013, and it was for the pro-democracy activists that were actually in Ukraine, pre-Maidan Square. So it's been something we've been thinking about for a long, long time. It's been something we've been doing for a long, long time. If you want to help and give back, the other thing I'd like to just sort of conclude with is that you can also donate Bitcoin to, like, for example, the Kiev Independent, which is a fantastic independent media source inside of Ukraine. They accept Bitcoin donations.
Yeah, that's great.
You can donate to a variety of humanitarian organizations. And I would just point out that, like, as far as cryptocurrency in its moment, it's worth noting that the Ukrainian government has raised more than $100 million of cryptocurrency for bulletproof vests and food and equipment. And that's a big deal. And I think that people should pause and take a look at that and realize that this monetary technology is here to stay.